Hey guys, it's Will here, Potato Strong. I just thought I would talk about big eating, binge eating, that type of thing. People that seem to think they have a problem eating too much, like at one time. I was talking to a coaching client about this, amongst other things, and just thought I would give some tips. And these are just my thoughts on it. First of all, your couple of caveats is one: if you have some sort of eating disorder, like binging, purging, or bulimia, that type of thing, obviously, you should seek professional help. And also, if you're very active and you're like cycling long distances and things like that, running, and you're eating huge meals and you're not overweight or whatever, it's not really a problem. But this is for people that are still struggling with their weight. And I've been approached a few times, as coaching clients, and also just questions online about one of the possible problems that they mentioned was that they eat like huge portions and they don't feel full and that type of thing. And they were wondering if that's part of the problem or the main problem. So assuming you don't have any, psychological issues and that mental health issues, eating disorders, then these tips might help. So I came up with a variety of possibilities to why you're eating these big meals, and if they are actually a problem. And one of the main things that I've noticed and sort of verified by talking to people after the fact is not eating enough for. Usually, what happens is it's a big dinner, like an evening meal, so they won't eat enough. If you're not eating enough for breakfast or lunch, it might actually be more than one day where you restrict yourself. So it's kind of like restriction, holding back, willpower, and then going crazy at some point. So you see, binging can occur in different scenarios. It could be junk food, restaurant, like just going nuts, or it could just be you held back for breakfast and lunch for whatever reason. You're really busy, or you're trying to restrict yourself, and then eventually it catches up to you and you go crazy with a bigger meal. And so one thing I generally suggest is that you try your best to eat 3 main filling meals a day, and that'll probably reduce the fact, the temptation or the drive to do a huge binge meal. And it may restrict or reduce the some of the snacking that can occur as well. So I know I've seen so many situations in the last 5 years where it's not just knowingly restricting, but the diet that I promote is a plant-based diet, starch-based, which is generally lower in calorie density than a lot of the typical diets out there that have a high fat content or protein. So they'll just be like a paleo, keto, things like where you're eating higher fat foods. You have to reduce the portions in order to keep your calories within a certain limit. So the plant-based diet allows you to eat bigger volumes of food than other diets are. So sometimes people will think they're eating a lot of starch and they're not. So I've known people. So if you have to kind of look at what you're eating. If you can estimate the calories per se, just to see, are you really eating like an insane amount of calories at that meal, a huge portion. It may actually not be that big of a portion as far as calories go, because you can eat larger volumes in general. So that's a kind of a related point, is that the volumes you're going to be eating on a plant-based diet are actually bigger to begin with. So it may be some mental or psychological process, or where you're looking at something and thinking it's bigger than it is, and you maybe feel guilty about it, but it's actually not that big. It's just that it's like the calorie wise, but it's a bigger volume of food. So that's a related issue to the fact that you're not necessarily eating enough. So it could be a reason why you're binging if in the evenings, let's say, if you haven't eaten big enough portions, just because you think you're eating too much on a starch-based diet. But it also could be because you're busy, or you're trying to hold back and diet and stuff like that. So that's kind of two related topics that could help. Another aspect is that it may not be the actual portion of that meal that you're worried about. Like I get a lot of comments or emails where the person might be struggling with their weight at some point during this process, and they may automatically go to the potatoes or the rice or the bean, think they're eating too much starch. And it could be a lot of other things. It could be oils, hidden oils and sugars in various things. It could be restaurants, snack food, junk food. And so being able to really look at your what you're eating and figure out what is the actual problem. So even though we don't really advocate people measuring and counting calories, if you're really having a tough time, because for a lot of people, this is a natural occurrence. You start eating plant-based foods, whole foods. It's way lower calorie density, lower calorie intake on a fuller stomach, and then the weight falls off over time. But there are the odd person who somehow have issues, and there could be different reasons for that, but there might be a period where you really need to just track things a bit. And it may not be the starches that are the problem. So it's an automatic assumption a lot of times that the starches are the problem, that there's just too much, because people think that carbs make you fat and that type of thing. And there's a fear of it. So that's another thing to consider. I just made a few notes here. Make sure I hit all the points. Assuming those aren't the issues, what you can do is to reduce the total calorie intake is to replace some of the starches with non-starchy veggies. So what I like to do with stir fries and soups, for the most part, and also pasta to some extent, is to add a lot of non-starchy veggies. So in a stir fry, we'll have carrots, like obviously onions, garlic, and all that, but beefing it up with carrots, broccoli, cauliflower, and there's a whole bunch of things, mushrooms, and kale, spinach, stuff like that. So that'll just, and you might have to transition to more and more veggies, like non-starchy veggies, because a lot of times when people eat like a standard American diet, and even when they go to Starch, they're not used to eating a lot of veggies. It's not something that you're enjoying too much, but I really love them now. And then same thing with soups. I throw in this California mix. It's frozen. It's got broccoli, cauliflower, carrots, and like I say, we'll throw in kale, spinach, frozen as well, chopped up. And you can do certain things with pasta. I don't really put broccoli or cauliflower. You could put probably cauliflower, but I wouldn't really like to put cauliflower or broccoli into a tomato sauce. That's just my preference, but there's lots of other things you could do. So that'll kind of, if you find you're eating big volumes and you're struggling with your weight, you can reduce the calorie density by just adding in a lot of non-starchy veggies. And obviously there's a lot of nutrients in there too. Fiber, it's really healthy for you. If it's, usually what's happening if it's done in a typical situation without an eating disorder type thing is you're eating because you want to reach that fullness and that satiety. So just having your stomach full of stretched out is not, like volume wise, is not the only factor. Because obviously, like you could eat a big salad or something which has hardly any calories if you don't add a lot of oil or fats to it, and you won't really feel satiated because there's not enough caloric density there, calories in your meal. So it's not just about the stretch receptors in your stomach. So what you can do is potentially look at proteins, and that would be like certain starches have more protein, like rice and potatoes are fairly low in protein, but even pasta has more protein. So and then you have beans like black beans, kidney beans, soybean, and chickpeas, and so you can add, like even when we have other starches like rice and noodles for soup, we put peas in there and edamame in the stir fries. And soy has a fair amount of fat, and so related to protein, just before I finish with protein is I find refried beans, which are pinto beans that are mashed. They're not fried in oil or anything like that. I find those are super filling. So trying to find those foods that really fill you up and satiate you is great, because sometimes, rice might not do it for you and you eat a ton of rice and it's just not happening. And so try experimenting with different starches. And then, like I said, with the soybean having more fat. Now, this is a little bit of a dangerous area, because when I tell people, to add fat, if I tell someone to add fat, you have to be careful that they're not going to go crazy, because fat is pretty high calorie density. But some people feel, especially when you're first transitioning, is to go from a normal, fairly high fat diet to a low fat diet. Fat has a certain amount of satiation to it. It also slows down digestion. So people will suggest that, that they like to eat, the fats are helping. And you'd have to really do a detailed analysis of that. If you add a bit of fat, does that really reduce the total other stuff that you eat, because of it's helping? If it does actually help you reduce your other calories, like the starches, as a net total that you consume for that meal, then it would make sense. But there is an adjustment period when you're going from a normal, fairly high fat processed food diet to a lower fat diet. So I don't like to suggest that people add fats just because of that particular aspect, but soy has higher fats in it. So, and the whole food version is edamame. They look like peas, and they, but this is an area that you want to be careful with, because it can easily become just, people putting lots of oil and peanut butter and things like that in the food, and that could cause issues. So that's kind of the main things. Just to summarize, it might not be the starches that's, if you think you're eating a huge meal of starch and that's what's causing your problems, it may not be this actual starch. It could be that you're restricting earlier in the day, or even for a few days, and then eventually it catches up to you. So try to eat 3 main filling meals. And depending on your caloric intake needs, it could be 800 calories a meal, and that would be 2,400 without counting snacks. So make sure you're getting, because like 1/3 of a cup, which is serving of dry oatmeal, is only 100 and something calories. So definitely not enough, even if you add some fruit, berries and stuff. Adding more veggies to dilute the caloric density and just allow you to eat full if you need that stretch. The other thing I noticed, I didn't mention, but I just thought of it now, is I find that, I ate bigger portions, and then I over time I've sort of reduced the portions. And I think because we're used to stuffing ourselves and eating these huge portions, and that stretches your stomach. And as you start to reduce, even though we're allowed, even though this is a great method, because a great diet, because it allows you to eat a lot of volume food, your stomach may shrink over time, and the portions you need to be full, just from the stretch receptor aspect, would be reduced. Because I think earlier on, I was going a little bit crazy with huge portions of baked fries and even sometimes smoothies, and I found that I felt pretty uncomfortable, and so I didn't enjoy that, and I've been cutting back a little bit just on the size of the meals, and that may be partly from the stomach stretching. But and then if you want to look at, I would look at more protein-rich starches if that's still causing you problems. Feeling that satiation is looking at, like people say potatoes are very satiating, even though they're pretty low in protein, because they're pretty heavy in your stomach. That's the other thing I found, is the weight of the food sort of seems to have an impact, not just the stretch receptors, but and I think that's partly why potatoes are so filling. But look at proteins like protein type starches that are beans in particular, legumes are quite satiating. So hope that helps. If you have any other tips for people, feel free to put them in the comments. And I'm just trying to, with this video, help people who may feel that eating big portions, binge eating, is a problem and causing them some issues. So hope that helps, and we'll talk to you guys next time. See ya.